And welcome to the Mississippi Family Homestead podcast. I'm Scott, along with my wife, Tina. And tonight we're going to talk about what is homesteading. That seems to be the big question we get asked a lot. What is homesteading?
And can you do it?
Yeah.
Homesteading, back in the day, you thought about having like 100 acres of land and having every kind of animal you can imagine. But I don't think it's that anymore. It is not that. And I think people get in their mind this thing that homesteading is not for them because they don't think they can accomplish it. But I think anybody can accomplish some part of homesteading.
Right. And we are actually coming to you from central Mississippi, where homesteading is pretty common down here. But it's also what we're going to tell you is hopefully to encourage you if you're living in an apartment building, maybe a high-rise downtown, and you may be living on the 10th floor and wanting to get started in some of this. So hopefully this will encourage you to kind of get started in this homesteading. So what we're going to go over today is you don't really need a big farm to get started.
You don't need a big farm.
And what homesteading means in 2026 is probably a little bit different than what it meant in 1860.
Exactly.
So and then we're going to look at the reasons people are homesteading, and also what it really means to us and what we do on our homestead.
Right. And it's not that you have to change your whole lifestyle. You can do a little bit of homesteading on just what you got. So you don't have to actually change, anything. You don't have to go out and buy 100 acres to start homesteading.
Right. And before we get into it, I want to remind you that we do have a YouTube channel, Mississippi Family Homestead, and you can look at all of our links if you go to just our website, MississippiFamilyHomestead.com. Our contact information is on there also if you have a comment. So actually, what is homesteading?
So back in the day, in 1862, there was a Homestead Act that the U.S. government passed. And this is why it's called homesteading. So the government was giving out acreage. They gave out, I think, was it 160 acres?
Yeah, I think it was 160 acres.
160 acres. And you could live on that land for 5 years, and then that land become yours. But back then, in 1862, that was like hard work.
We think about it. Well, that's cool. I'd love to, the government to give me 160 acres. But the catch was you had to farm it for 5 years, right?
Right.
And farming back in 1862 was a little bit different than farming now in 2026.
Exactly, because you had to really, really work that land. And that was the big movement, when settlers were going out west, back then. That's when that all started. I think it was kind of right after the Civil War when all of that started, when there was the big movement for the families to move out west. That was that was the Homestead Act.
So would you have moved out west?
I don't know. That's a big
you're
question.
a Little House on the Prairie fan and all that. So would you have moved out there?
I guess I would.
Because that's kind of where that was from, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. I guess I would have. I guess everybody would have if you were living in town, especially, and you had a family and you were ready to go live somewhere besides where you were living. I think I would have.
And that, you got to remember the place and time of that is kind of before the dual job, the corporate 9-to-5 jobs came along.
Right.
You were.
There was a lot of.
It was about survival then.
Poor families, and here the government was telling them that you can have 160 acres and live on it, and to them that was like, let's go. We can do this and raise our family and have that homestead. So that's where that word came from.
Yeah.
But let's fast forward to 2026. It's a whole different world.
Yeah, it is. Homesteading is different now, and I think it's a lot different now with even the internet. the internet has kind of glamorized homesteading with the YouTube channels, make it look perfect and make it look entertaining. And look, let me tell you, we love it. We would not give it up for anything, but it's not glamorous all the time.
No, it's not glamorous all the time. We have our ups and downs and things that happen. We have chickens, and we've had lost chickens or whatever, or sometimes it gets dry here and there's not enough water to water the garden. You have to use the county water to water the garden.
Yeah.
So you lose crops or whatever, and it's not glamorous. And here in Mississippi, it's really hot.
Right.
So it's hard to work in that garden when it's really, really hot outside.
So when you're talking about homesteading, one simple way to put it is, do you grow your own food? Or do you grow not all of your own food, but did you grow any of your own food?
Yeah.
Do you bake your own bread? Do you can anything? Or, do you keep any animals that are not just pets, but,
like
a lot of people
like a few chickens
or
whatever.
Like chickens.
So if you can answer yes to those questions, then you're a homesteader. You're homesteading.
Yeah.
You are actually doing that right now if you can answer yes to any of those things. So that's the very first step, So you can call yourself a homesteader if you're doing any of those this day and age in 2026.
So what's your favorite thing about homesteading?
So my chickens. I mean, that's just a given for me. My favorite thing is my chickens.
I think my favorite thing is raising our own food. We do have a big garden. Last year we weren't able to do the garden. Before that, we've done it for quite a few years. But I think the garden and having that food, supply for us, and actually raising our own food, that's my favorite part, to be, kind of a little more self-sufficient. And less dependent on the grocery stores.
Right, to raise our own food.
Yeah.
And, this year, what that looks like for us is, we've gotten some raised garden beds, but we also have a big garden, and it is pretty big. So we've got peas and butter beans and tomatoes. We've got squash and zucchini and corn,
broccoli,
and cucumbers and broccoli. And
right.
We're so excited about our garden and our raised beds this year, which brings me to a question.
Yeah.
The very first level of homesteading. The very first level of homesteading would be an apartment or condo homesteading.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of, I don't know if that's exactly homesteading, but I think that's kind of a getting started or trying to see if you're interested in homesteading.
Right.
But there is so much you could do even if you were in an apartment.
Right. If you're in an apartment, you can have a tomato plant in a 5-gallon bucket, on a balcony somewhere. If you've got some kind of small place, you can grow some, just some mint or some oregano or some chives or something like that in a a little bed somewhere. Any kind of little apartment that you live in, you could grow something out on your little balcony.
And one thing I did, and there's a video about this on our YouTube channel, I got some buckets. They were actually food grade buckets, and I planted some tomatoes in it. I drilled holes in the bottom, got the organic soil and everything, and planted tomatoes just to prove that you could do it.
Right.
On the balcony.
Because you can.
And you can do that, if you live in an apartment, you're not going to be able to get a whole year's food supply, but I think the idea of it is more of to give you a little taste of what it is, and to see if that's what you want to do. And then you may want to get out of the apartment and move somewhere where you can do
and the
something.
big thing now is to make bread. A lot of people are making their own sourdough bread, and if you're making your own bread, there's just something about making your own stuff, cooking your own bread instead of buying that bread from the grocery store. And that is, part of homesteading or learning to homestead too, is making your own things from scratch like that, like the bread.
So I would say in that level, if you're in an apartment, that's kind of the seeing if you like it stage, or seeing if you want to move further and get into it.
Even if you go to a farmer's market instead of a regular chain grocery store to buy, some fresh vegetables like some tomatoes or, the fresh strawberries that actually come from somebody's farm, instead of the market.
That you don't know literally where in the world they came from.
No, you don't. And you don't know what kind of chemicals were put on them.
And that's one of the main things about homesteading. And that is one of the main reasons that we do this, because honestly, it's easier and cheaper to go to the grocery store. Well, I don't know about now. It really may not be, but we know exactly where a big part of our food comes from.
Now, it is cheaper once we have our garden and we get our vegetables growing, because I'm buying none of those vegetables from the grocery store. And I think
another thing is, it's, depending on the size, we do have a pretty big garden, and depending on the size of the garden that you have, I don't think the first few years it was cheaper for us, because we did buy a tiller. We have purchased a tractor. So, the tractor's used for many other things, but the first year it may not actually be cheaper for you.
Right.
But it's going to be better for you.
That's
because
right. The food is better.
Yeah, you know what is in that food.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the main reason for homesteading.
Right. And even, like growing that tomato on your balcony, that, what you're putting on that tomato to grow it on your balcony. So,
and some people may debate us on whether that's homesteading or not. I would say that's if you're in an apartment growing these things, I think that's a good start in the homesteading.
I think so too.
And I would like to encourage anybody to try it, because I think once you, my sister lives in a nice neighborhood, and she was asked just recently, would you like to have a farm? And she said, oh yeah, I would love it. To have, and we moved out from the HOA, and we moved away from the HOA back here to family land, and it's not the fancy neighborhood. We downsized a lot, and we got rid of the real fancy house, and I think we are so much happier now, and we just feel so much better.
We do. So speaking of your sister, she's on the level 2, like where you could.
But she's not what I'd call a homestead.
No, but
now she's getting into it though. She's kind of thinking about it.
Well, I mean, the place that she's living in would be where someone could start level 2 of homesteading when you're in a neighborhood,
right?
And you may have
if they'll allow you to do a garden.
Yeah, if they'll allow you to do a garden and maybe have a few chickens, that is level 2 of where you could be, in homesteading, or getting to that level of homesteading. She lives in a neighborhood where she has, a small yard and stuff, and she could do this level 2 if she wanted to.
She could do some of it, but the neighborhood she lives in, I'm sure she could not have chickens, but
some people could.
She could, right? Some people could, but now she could have a raised bed garden. Mm-hmm. And I think she would really like that. I think that would be a good start.
Most anybody could do a raised bed garden, even in a small yard.
Yeah.
Those raised garden beds, and you can grow so much.
Like we've got 2 raised beds that I think they're 4x8, and I just went down there and trimmed the tomatoes today. And they're doing really good.
And we've got tomatoes, we've got lettuce, we've got cabbage, we've got peppers in there, we've got broccoli, we've got onions, and cabbage.
Right.
In those raised garden beds. And that in itself is meals, meal after meal. And, if you add some some mint and some oregano and those kind of stuff to your raised garden bed, then you're growing the stuff that you actually cook with anyway, that you buy.
Exactly.
Most people buy dried, then you're having that in that raised garden bed to cook with.
And by the way, I looked at it today. We had a lot of rain over the weekend, so I was kind of looking at everything. And, before we were not able to raise onions. And I think we're going to have a good crop of onions this year. We're not going to have a huge crop because we didn't plant a huge crop.
Right.
But
we're going to have
we've
some.
got, we're going to have some onions this year, and that's in the raised beds, and anybody can do that.
Yes.
We do have a traditional garden out front. And it's a pretty big garden, but, the point is you don't have to have a huge farm to start homesteading.
Right. And if you're living in a neighborhood and, if you have an HOA, you want to check this, but a lot of them you can have a few chickens, even in a HOA, as long as you don't have a rooster. Most HOAs are okay with that. If you have some kind of yard and you keep their chickens.
Or some, there's a lot of HOAs that don't allow you to do anything.
There's a lot of rules and regulations, but, that's one thing that you could look into is trying to see if you can get
I would definitely
chickens.
check with the HOA because there's a lot of rules. There's a lot of HOAs that don't allow chickens.
Right.
I'd say most of them don't.
And another thing that you can do for whatever, whether it's, the level 1 where you're in an apartment or if you're in level 2, if you can go purchase some fruit, whatever kind of fruit, you can make jams and jellies out of that fruit.
Look,
and you can can it.
We do that too, and we've been doing this. We actually Tina gets some grape juice and, just to see, we make our own jelly out of grape juice.
That's right.
And, just to kind of learn stuff.
And if you go to a farmer's market, you could actually get, bushels of green beans or butter beans or whatever it is.
Before.
We've done that before, and we've canned those.
Yeah.
Or put them up in the freezer. So, I have went to like a farmer's market and they have these big bushel packs of butter beans and sometimes peas, and you can freeze those or you can can those. So that's another thing you could do that is part of homesteading, is canning and freezing. And if you're buying those fresh vegetables like that, you know that they're a lot more fresher than the frozen ones or the canned ones that you're going to get in the store. And then you're doing that for yourself, and it makes you feel good to be able to take those vegetables and that fruit or make your own jams and jellies that you did that, for your family and for yourself. I think it helps.
And, I like to do pickles, but you could buy the cucumbers at a place and buy the deal.
Right, you
and
could.
Make your own pickles. You can look it up on the internet on how to do pickles. Now, the level we are at is one that we've had to work for, and, we're at that rural area level, but want to be clear, we didn't just get here overnight.
No,
and
we didn't.
We did, I'd say, just about all the work ourselves.
We did.
And
we have around 50 acres.
Yeah.
And we were blessed because we inherited, the land. Now we didn't have to pay for it. But we were very blessed to be able to have that acreage. But when we first moved here, there was an old garden area, and we had that. But as far as where our home is and where the chickens are and all of that, we had to clear land.
And we basically, the first part that we cleared actually by hand.
Mm-hmm.
We finally did buy a small tractor. And, it didn't have a front end loader or anything, but it would, maybe pull a few things, and, we bought that, but we've been getting a little bit as we can. And also, the farm is not financially self-sufficient at all. It's, we totally support this through our full-time jobs.
That's
so we're
right.
doing full-time jobs and this. So
you can do homesteading with a full-time job also. You just have to be a little bit more committed.
Right.
So if you're thinking about homesteading, but you think that you've got to quit your job to do it, you don't. You can have a garden and you can have chickens without quitting your full-time job.
And we talk all the time. Our grandparents, both of our grandparents, they had full-time jobs and their garden looked perfect. Unfortunately, I went out in our garden today just after a rain. It did not look perfect.
No.
It looked perfect about 5 days ago, and now it don't. But, I'm not going to let it stress me. I'm going to do what I can. It's not going to be the perfect garden.
That's right.
But we're going to get stuff out of it.
Yes,
it does
we
have
are.
some weeds in it. Your grandfather wouldn't like that, but we're doing the best we can.
Yeah, and the thing is, a homestead doesn't have to be perfect.
And I think that's the thing, is don't look at all these people online. Look at them to learn from.
Right.
But when they show you their perfect garden, it may not really be perfect because it's kind of easy to just show a little portion of it. Mm-hmm. And,
not show the whole story.
Don't let it stress you out because the purpose of homesteading is to give you a better life.
Right. And it should give you a better life. You shouldn't stress yourself out, over your homestead. And if your garden is not perfect or your raised beds are not perfect or, whatever, it's not going to be perfect. And like you see on the YouTube channels, sometimes I think they romanticize it and they make it look, just perfect, and it's not going to be perfect.
Right.
The life of homesteading is not perfect.
No, it's not. And that's part of the fun of it.
Yeah, and if you're looking, to get into homesteading, just know that it's not going to be perfect.
Right. I mean, like our air conditioner breaks just like anybody else's. Our pipes bust, stuff like that. If you're in an apartment building, you may not know what I'm talking about, but if you own a home, we have, the appliances go out. So we deal with the same stuff everybody else does. Mm-hmm. Now, one thing we do is, we try to fix things here. But I wanted to also go, talk about our personal story. We are on the 50 acres of land, but we haven't always been here.
No, we've been here for 6 years.
Yeah, and we had, a nice house. It was what I would call a suburban house, and we were real proud to have it at the time, but we were glad to get rid of it too, wasn't we?
We were very glad to get rid of it and move to the family land, and we downsized, and decided that this life is for us and not the urban, fancy, nice house.
Yeah, and we realized that we kind of got to the point, we were, when we moved in the nice house, we thought, oh, we got a nice house, blah, blah, blah. And then it actually, honestly, turned into a nightmare.
It did.
It looked good on the outside, but if any of you older people have ever seen that movie Money Pit, mm-hmm. It was a nice looking version of that.
Yeah, but it was very hard, and we decided, we had rather be out here on this family land and live simpler,
right?
And grow our own food and all of that instead of living in that really bricks and mortar, so-called nice house.
Yeah, because if if that's what you like, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. And like we said, you can still have something in that.
The guy across the street had a small garden over there. You weren't really supposed to, but the HOA wasn't real strict there.
Yeah.
But still there was one. But I remember he did grow some stuff there.
He did. I remember that.
And, but we were at the point, we were ready to get out of there. We were, we just kind of got tired of it, and it just, I don't know, it was kind of a meaningless type thing, or, kind of, it wasn't us, I guess you could say that.
So.
We weren't cut out for that.
No, we wasn't. Especially for all the things that we had to fix.
Right. Even setting that apart, if the house was perfect, I think it was time for us to get out. Because a lot of that didn't happen until we were trying to sell the house.
Right. I don't know what was up with that.
And it just, we could go on for another podcast about that, but it was just, that isn't what drove us out of there. We were, wanting to get out of that. before.
Yeah, so we did, and we moved to this land.
And actually, we would watch homesteading channels on YouTube.
Right. Before
And I
we
think
moved.
that's kind of what encouraged us to do it.
I think so too. And, we moved about 6 years ago. I think it's going on 7 now, 6 or 7 years ago. And we have really, cleared the land and gotten, a cheaper home to live in.
Yeah, we got a much cheaper home because when we were getting this home, they were kind of looking at us funny. And, we decided we don't really care about impressing anybody anymore at our age.
No.
We really don't have anybody that comes over.
No, we don't.
And that's fine.
We have a few close friends, and that's fine, and family. But we don't have anybody that
And their
comes
house
over.
is about the size of this one, too. So,
That's true. That's
so
true.
it's nothing wrong, So we just decided we were done trying to impress people we don't like.
So, so what do you think, moving on, the core skills are for a homesteader?
You asking me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think one of the big one is you've got to have a do-it-yourself attitude.
Yeah.
I'm around a lot of people that don't have they have the opposite of do-it-yourself attitude. There is no way we could afford to be out here if we didn't do a lot of stuff ourselves. If the tractor breaks, normally we fix it. If the car breaks, we fix it. And, I'm not a mechanic. I wasn't trained as a mechanic, but I do, I've learned some stuff. But different things that break, we do it. And then also, we build it too.
Right. We build, you've built the chicken coop. And sometimes I think that it's probably easier for a man sometimes to build things and that kind of stuff than it is a woman, but not that a woman can't.
I have seen
too.
On YouTube. I have seen some extremely talented women building stuff that really.
And not that they can't. I'm just saying that sometimes it's easier for a man to do things sometimes, but women can do things too, but. A lot of times when you talk about the homesteading, it is as a family. Most of the time when you're starting a homestead, you're doing it as a family and not just, one person trying it. I think if it was just one person doing it, it would be harder than it is as a couple, as we do. I think, you would have to be more determined to do it if it
but
was
it's just possible.
I think it's possible. Of course it's possible. But one thing that makes it easier or is more sustainable, I guess, is to have, a family working.
Yeah.
And if you have kids, it helps for them, to learn how to grow things and stuff on a homestead. And, maybe not stay in their phone or on the TV or whatever, or on their computer or playing games. They're outside learning something. And so to me, that's more of the homestead is getting your family involved in it and teaching your kids more about growing their own food and where it actually comes from instead of going to the grocery store or sitting there playing on your phone or on a computer or whatever all day. To me, it's better for your family.
Right.
To be a homesteader.
That's one thing, we talk about the things we wish we would have done different. That's one thing that I wish, there's some things that I don't regret. I think it helped us learn and appreciate this more. And probably if we would have started our whole life out here for the beginning and stayed here, I don't know that we'd appreciate it as much.
Right.
But and then another part of me wishes the kids would have grown up out here.
Right.
I think they would, I think, they turned out good. They're not perfect, but I think some things would have been a little different. And I believe, that they would have been, I would have liked to have brought them up out in the garden, and that kind of thing. But, you can't go back, but, we're not perfect.
So some things that we may need to talk about that will help you become a homesteader is for, one thing is to, start growing your own food.
Yeah.
Get you a raised garden bed if possible. Grow something on the balcony. That'll help you, become a homesteader. And if you're, buying your land for the first time or buying some land to grow on, just try to start simply with growing your own food. Don't start with a huge garden. Try some simple vegetables at first, like squash and tomatoes are really easy to grow.
Yeah.
If you grow those, start with simple vegetables to grow, things like that.
Let me say this about if you're buying your own land, if you're starting to buy land, before you buy that land, if you're planning on having a garden, what you may want to do is get one of the old folks out there and say, can I have a good garden on here?
Right.
That may save you a little bit in the long run.
Right.
So if you're buying land, I would suggest that, try to figure out what you're going to do with that land. And then it never hurts to get an old person.
Right. Because they know a lot.
Yeah. I mean, they can look at it. They can be what we call nowadays your consultant.
And if you're buying land, make sure that you know what your long-term plan is for that land. If you only want the land and you're just going to have a garden and maybe some chickens, then know that, think about your long-term plan. But if you're wanting some cows eventually, you may want to buy land that's already cleared,
Right.
So you don't have to do that. And also your water sources on your land. Think about getting land that might already have a pond.
If you're going to get cows, you're going to
or something running through it. If you're going to get cows or big livestock, then you need some kind of water source.
Right. You want to make sure you have a water source.
Otherwise, you're digging some wells and you're.
And that's another thing. If you're buying land and you've never had cows, but you want cows, I would highly recommend before you buy that land that unless there were already cows on it, that you get somebody that has raised cows to just come out there with you and say, is this a good place?
Right.
Right. Because they'll give you, they can save, and most of them won't mind and they would love to do it. And they could save you thousands of dollars by doing that. But,
right. So that, that's just a thing that you want to think about before if you're going to buy land, and start small with the food.
Absolutely.
Also, if you're not buying land and you're just, in a home and you're just on level 2 and you can't go out and buy 50 acres, then just think about those small things that you can do, like get you a raised garden bed, preserve your food, go to, like we said before, go somewhere to a farmer's market and get you some food to preserve.
And take it step by step.
Yeah.
Don't just think, don't jump into it.
Right.
Just because you think you got to do it now, the world's going to end.
Right. And if you're living in a HOA or whatever, you can think about getting you some chickens and ask about it. Check with your HOA or rules and regulations of the state and get.
Right. And if you're in a HOA and it won't let you, then you may want to consider moving somewhere where there's not an HOA. That's what we did. We moved out of the HOA.
Even when you move to your land or wherever you're moving to, don't jump into buying a whole bunch of animals at one time. I would start with chickens or something small.
And we have started, that's one thing I think we did okay. We did have a big garden the first year we got here, but we've also had that garden for a little while, so we knew what we were getting into.
Yeah, we did.
And sometimes that big garden ends up quite a bit of work. And then also on the chickens, you've got 30 chickens now, but you started out with just a few.
Yeah, we started out with 10.
Yeah,
and
which is kind of a lot. But you still, it's. If it's your first time ever to have chickens, I think I would recommend just having a few at first time.
Right. Just 4 or 5 hens, to lay the eggs is great.
Because they're going to be a lot more work than you think they are.
Right. And, so that's one thing that you can think about. The other thing you can think about, even if you're not buying your 50 acres, is do it yourself.
Yeah.
Learn how to do things yourself. Or if you're, if you're wanting to retire and buy some land eventually, start doing, thinking about things that you can learn how to do yourself.
Yeah. And I think unless you've, got millions in the bank, and probably if you do, you're not listening to this podcast and you're not interested in homestead. I don't know, you may be. But,
right.
But I think it's important to learn to do it yourself because, like I said before a few minutes ago, you just can't. There is no way we could afford to do what we do if we didn't fix it ourselves.
Right.
And we pretty well fix everything here ourselves.
We do. And then, if you're thinking about buying land or whatever, and that you're going to be far out in the country somewhere, you might want to think about getting some solar, or some kind of, energy besides just electric. Get you some solar panels, save on electricity, even if you could get you some solar panels.
And that's one thing we're planning on doing. We are not off grid right now, but we are planning on getting to that point where we have plans of building a cabin that's off grid back in the back of the property. We've kind of started clearing off that. I've started with just a chainsaw, and we do have a tractor, but I've started, just me going back there and doing that. So, I figure it's good exercise, but also if you've never had a chainsaw, you do need to look at the safety, on that, the safety, and plus a tractor too. You do need to go over the safety stuff. I want to say something back on the DIY stuff. If I don't want to discourage anybody if you just can't fix anything, but you do want to try.
Right.
But have you a plan to try to, just know that if you can't, the more stuff that you can't fix, the more it's going to cost and you're going to have to pay. It's just like owning a home, it's the same thing, except your home turns into several acres, but I don't want to discourage anybody just because you don't have that skill. But nowadays with YouTube out there's so many things that you can do to fix.
You can learn, especially like the canning and preserving your food and putting it up. There are so many things on YouTube that, videos that show you how to cook, home meals or put up, canned food. There's so much stuff on there that teaches you how to do things. And, I feel like you could watch those and probably learn how to do a lot of stuff.
And speaking of that, do you remember this was well before we moved out here? And when I was traveling a lot for work. And do you remember when you looked it up? And this is, YouTube was extremely young then. It had just come out and there was just stuff on there. Yeah. And you looked at the belt or something went out. Was it the washing machine?
Probably so. The washer, the dryer, or something.
One of them had something go out at it, and you looked it up and you took care of it.
Yes, I looked it up. I ordered a belt or whatever it was, and I fixed it myself with no help.
Yeah, so it can be done, but be very careful if you do that. Go by all the safety precautions on that. So, but it is important to try to. You can save a lot of money, and really, it's just as a homeowner, you can save money by doing stuff yourself. And other things you can do to save money, if you're looking at that and really wanting to start homesteading. I know that a lot of people don't like this, but you can hang your clothes out to dry. My mom, she lives in a neighborhood, and she used to, when we were growing up. Of course, we grew up in the 70s and 80s, and a lot more people were doing this. But even, up until recent, she had a clothesline. It was a little square clothesline. She loved hanging her clothes out.
On the clothesline?
And, we, honestly, we don't do that, but we could. I think if we ever move to the off-grid place, we will probably do that. But, that is possible to hang your clothes up. It still works even today.
So now why are people, one of the questions that we want to ask is, why do you think people are getting into the homesteading, and why are they turning into this lifestyle now? And so there's a few things, that we think, and one of those big things for us is food security and knowing what's in your food.
Right, exactly. That's one of the main reasons that I do a garden is, it is a lot of work, because I know the days I have to plow the whole garden, I'm just worn out because I'm 55 years old, and, I should have been in better shape, but I do get out there and do it, and I'm worn out, so it is a lot of work. But when we bring those vegetables in, I know where they came from.
That's right.
I know
and
that
they're not got preservatives
right.
and chemicals and all of that kind of stuff in there.
Yeah. And we even know on, a lot of them, we know where the seeds came from,
that's
too.
Right. That's right. We know where we bought the seeds, or
right.
wherever we bought the plants that we're putting in our garden.
So food security is a big thing. And we made, we were very busy last year, and we weren't able to do the garden. So we had to not do the garden, and we really missed it. But one thing we like to do is build up enough. We try to build up enough for a whole year.
Right.
That's not a whole year of food and never go to the grocery store, but that is a whole year of the vegetables.
Right.
That part
so whenever I have that food put up for our vegetables, I hardly buy any.
Yeah. So would you say it saves money to once it's going?
Yes, it absolutely saves money once it's going. And, there's days where we'll just eat just vegetables and not meat,
And, when they're out of the garden, I love doing that.
I know. You can have 4 kinds of vegetables and not have to have any kind of meat on your plate.
And I'm looking forward to that broccoli, too.
Yes, I am, too. I can't wait.
I
can't wait till we have the broccoli.
Actually, we did... it's just now springtime, fixing to enter into the summer here in Mississippi, and we just got some lettuce. Now, lettuce is more, once it gets into the summer, it's not going to,
be as good.
Be a good down here in Mississippi, but we're going to get a little bit of lettuce probably for a few more weeks, and then it won't be good anymore. And then but that'll be a fall crop here in Mississippi.
Yeah. So, and then, another thing that makes people want to homestead is for the inflation, food.
I'd say you're less affected by the inflation, wouldn't you say? Because
I would say,
when and let me say this, raising the chickens does not mean you have free eggs, but we do have a little bit more control of it. The food price we can't control, but when people were talking about the eggs skyrocketed, our price just kind of stayed the same. The food can go up, but it doesn't track like it does the grocery store.
That's right.
But you're not dependent on that supply chain from the grocery stores.
Yeah, you're not. And another thing that people why they want to homestead is just getting off of the hamster wheel, which we're still working on that.
We're still working on. We're going to be totally transparent. That's our goal is to get. And when we're talking about the 9-to-5 job thing, we both have really good jobs, and
we work full time.
We're getting to that point. We're just burnt out.
Yeah, we're ready to get away from those jobs, and actually, you're going to try to cut back.
Right, we're starting to phase back. You need to do it smarter now. And here's the thing: like some people, what they will do is sell their house and move somewhere else. But do remember, you're going to have to have some kind of income of some sort.
You are.
But if you can do this right, you don't have to have. You could probably work part-time or something. There are so many people that are actually And I know the people you see on YouTube, their YouTube channels a lot of time fund the farms. This one does not.
No,
you know,
it doesn't.
But our full-time jobs fund this farm.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I think it is possible you just have to find something on the land you can sell, find a job you can do,
A lot of people, they'll grow extra vegetables and stuff and then sell them at a farmer's market.
Right.
You can do that. Or, maybe sell your chicken eggs off your
Now,
farm.
there are some regulations for that. Check your state regulations.
Yeah, but you could possibly do that. You know, people love getting fresh eggs from a farm. Look into the laws about that, but you could technically sell your eggs.
If you think about it, if you sold your house and you didn't have any debt whatsoever, think of how low your cost would be to live. I mean, you can live on very low, if you don't, as long as you don't go out to eat and you don't, you're not going to be able to go to Universal Studios or Disney.
Right.
But, do you really have to?
Right.
I would say the quality of life is so much better for a family, once you do get to that level where you can get out there and enjoy it, but you just remember you do have to have, you're not going to be able to sell everything, move out there, and never have any income. You've got to have some kind of income to pay for it, obviously.
But, it's so satisfying to sit down at a table and eat the eggs and the vegetables from your homestead that you grew. That's just very satisfying to me to be able to do that.
And go ahead.
The next thing might be, why people are wanting to move to homesteading is you want to leave something for your children.
Yeah.
Land, that's something that's just going to be here, and it's going to be here for generation after generation as long as they don't sell it.
And this land here has been in the family for a long time.
A very long time.
Yeah.
This was my great grandparents' land. And then
did they ever think we would be doing a video podcast?
Probably not.
On their land?
Probably not on their land.
Yeah.
So land is something that, you can pass that on from generation to generation, and so that's something to think about.
See, you were blessed to have that. My family didn't have land. None of my family had land. They were all pretty well city people.
Or not just, what you said a while ago, just in teaching your children about the land and about how to grow the food and how to do the animals and stuff, and that's something that the world is losing.
Right.
Because
we're in this virtual world right now where everything's, I'm not talking about YouTube. I'm talking about like games where everything is just, is virtual. And it's just really sad that, things are like that. But that's when we've got a granddaughter on the way, and thankfully they're going to be, wanting to bring her up out here. And, I'm excited about that because her parents are wanting to raise her out here.
Right.
A lot of them be like, I don't want to raise, I want to move to the city so she could see the opportunities and stuff like that. But and either way, that's whatever you want to do. But I just, I this may sound funny, but I like to be connected to the land.
Yeah, yeah.
The Indians used to talk about that, being connected to the land.
Right.
And I just think it's good to be connected to the, we feel like we have a connection. Well, obviously you do because your family's been here. But.
Right. So, really, homesteading looks different for every family. We're all different and we all have a different family. So, homesteading is not going to look the same for every family.
Right.
If you have 5 kids, it's going to look way different than what it looks like for us, because our kids are grown.
Yeah.
And, we basically do most of the stuff, the garden and all that stuff. And we don't have the kids there to help us. So somebody that has 5 kids is going to have some help.
Right.
On their...
Train them young to get out there and help.
Yeah. So there's no rule book, on the homestead.
Right.
You do it how you want to do it, and you plan it how you want to plan it. And that's one good thing about homesteading, because it's not a rule. It's not a rule book that you have to go by.
Yeah,
you don't live in a we don't live in a HOA that makes the rules.
Right.
I mean, in where we live, there's very few state rules about homesteading.
True.
So there's not really any rule book that you have to go by homesteading. When you live in an apartment or an HOA, there's usually some rules that you got to go by. And for us, that is what's great about homesteading.
And just know we have been there.
We have been there, done that.
We didn't start out here. We have been there. And, and the whole purpose of our YouTube channel and, this podcast is to encourage you to do homesteading if that's what you want to do.
Right.
Because we want to see more people choose this lifestyle, because I think the world needs it. The world's got so much friction on it.
Yeah.
And, honestly, when we get out here, and I'm going to just say this, if you have a garden in the city, even getting out and working in that dirt, it's just a little
something
soothing.
Relaxing. It's something that relaxes you and gives you time away from the virtual world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even if you're living in Chicago with an apartment and balcony and growing something, that is homesteading, and you can do it that way. But like I said, it looks different to every person.
But don't think you can't grow some stuff, just, if they'll, unless your HOA says or apartment says no. But, a lot of times, like I said earlier, I did this just to see if I could do it. And I grew tomato, and I grew a few different things in like 3 or 4 5-gallon buckets, which would fit on a balcony and wouldn't hurt anybody. They were food grade buckets, and they actually, turned out. And,
that's neat.
I think some peppers, and I don't remember what else.
I think you put some, maybe some dill or something in there to grow. Yeah, so that was neat.
That will give you an idea of what you can do. And then, if it's your goal, work towards it. Try hard to work towards it, because it can be done. If we're doing it, it can be done. So even, if you're wherever you are and you're wanting to think about, starting a homestead, just do one thing, this week, just plant one plant.
Yeah. One seed.
And look, if you don't want to do the seeds, a lot of the stores now, in United States, you can go buy a tomato plant and replant it into a bigger pot.
5-gallon bucket.
Just start out with one.
Yeah, just one, or buy some canning supplies and try making your own grape jelly. That's the easiest thing. You can make jelly from fruit juice. Right.
There's a video on our channel and there's other videos that talk about, she bought just a few things.
Grape juice, pectin, and sugar, basically. Right. And
you made your own jelly. She made almost a year's worth of jelly
out of a thing of grape juice.
Yeah. We're going to wrap the podcast up. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sticking around. And remember, you can find us on YouTube, Mississippi Family Homestead. And also, the audio version is available to listen to on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and wherever you get your podcasts. So you can also contact us at scott@MississippiFamilyHomestead.com. We'll see you next time.